Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking about another classic module that we have recently played through in our Monday first edition game. There are going to be spoilers abound for the adventure, and there's probably going to be some things that we need to basically leave out of our analysis because there's some things that we as players have not fully come to realize that our characters have known or discovered yet. So this will prove to be quite an interesting episode. I will say that probably Eliot and I will probably refer to this adventure by the wrong title several times during the course of the episode, just because I don't think we were ever given the title of the adventure prior to when we prepared to record this episode. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think the title is pretty stupid, and I didn't want to set the tone of this being like a really nonsensical kind of thing, though I don't know. I'm interested to see how you guys think that turned out. But yeah, the original title is Night of the Walking Wet, which is just gross and silly. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it fits, but yeah, I don't think we would have given it quite as much thought and as much gravitas as we ended up giving it if we had known that it was called Night of the Walking Wet. I'm probably going to continue to refer to it as either Castle Crake or County Crake, which is the name of the location itself.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because this is an enormously complex module, one of the most complex adventures I've ever tried to run. And to present it on the tin as being just kind of a silly, send up kind of name, I think it really does it a disservice. But this was a bunch of goofy college kids, but we'll get into that here in a bit, I guess.
Now, I will say, prefacing what I'm about to say, that I'm absolutely startled by the small size of the font and the density of each page. But that being said, I've never in my life taken so long to get through 12 pages of information. It's a testament to how much a DM overestimates what the players will get through, because we dithered and dallied and just drug our butts through 6 months or more in these 12 pages of print. It's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, to be fair, this is probably 6, 7, 8-point font, somewhere like that in places. It's all over the place as far as what the font size is in the copy I have. But if you had this laid out like a modern 5e module, for one thing, they would expound a whole lot on a bunch of things that are just kind of hinted at that I had to kind of play off of in this text. And I would guess this would probably be at least a 30, 40 page module, not counting art, if this were to be printed today.
I think you're being very conservative. I would put this at probably 70 to 100 pages.
You might be right. Yeah.
I'm looking at the total stats for a particular character. Hormoth Fangtooth, the total stats that are given in the adventure, and the total stats are probably in the order of 30 characters long. Whereas in a 5e published 5e adventure, it would be an entire page of stats.
God, you're right. I didn't even consider all the character stats. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a testament to you, Jordan, because running this thing, oh my God. I mean, just the density of the print just being a DM trying to maneuver as the players move to different sections of the map and then have to interact with different people, having to go back and forth and back and forth. It had to be maddening.
Well, the real maddening part is that the PDF that I have is basically just an image scan, and I can't do text search on it. So that was probably the worst part of this for me.
So I guess here's my first question for you, Jordan. Did you do any prior to just reformatting, or did you go through and just kind of pull out some maybe essential notes or make notes on the notes? You know what I mean? Or did you just go bareback?
No, yeah, I read this multiple times before I presented it to you all, and I extracted the stats for the NPCs and there's several unique monsters in this that never show up anywhere again in D&D, and items and stuff. There's also some notes that I had to make about just idiosyncrasies in the way that the rules work, because I guess to properly introduce this to people, let's start kind of at the beginning here and explain what this is and when it came out. So Janelle Jaquays plus some friends, from what I understand, had a college zine that they called The Dungeoneer. And this was in the late 70s, somewhere around 1976, I believe. And it was, just very, very small print kind of thing, or small print run and small print. This thing is laid out with typewriter print. The PDF that I have has handwritten corrections in places. And the only version of this that I've ever been able to locate anywhere is from the Judges Guild, which is a company that really got going making third-party material for Dungeons and Dragons in the late 70s, before TSR started doing that for themselves. So at this time, this is white box OD&D. That's all you had. This is even prior to the Holmes basic box. And they came out with some adventures. City State of the Invincible Overlord and Teagle Manor are probably the two most famous ones that Judges Guild put out. But prior to that, this Dungeoneer magazine was coming out. And so far as I've been able to find, there was 6 issues that were independently made by Jaquays and company. And then Judges Guild purchased them, and they continued printing issues of of the Dungeoneer, very much like Dragon was TSR's kind of house, publishing organ thing. So anyway, they came out with this compendium of the first 6 issues, and this, I believe, was 1977, I think. So just to put this in perspective, Tomb of Horrors, the first TSR published module, came out in 1978. So this is early as fuck. There's probably 2 modules that you could point to, maybe 3, that were earlier, not even modules, but dungeons, that were earlier dungeons in D&D than this.
And would one of them have been, was it Temple of the Frog?
So Temple of the Frog, which is in Blackmore, the second supplement to the original white box OD&D books, that came out in 1975. If you want to get really in the archaeology, Rob Kuntz had an adventure called Sunken City that I think he only ran at an early Origins or Gen Con, but later published. So that was an early dungeon. There's the Dungeon of the Ground Goblins, which is just kind of a random thing that showed up in a magazine somewhere in 76. You've got Palace of the Vampire Queen, which is 76, and that's probably the first independently published adventure booklet that ever got released. And then you get into all the stuff from the Dungeoneer, and that's Fichelrak's Tomb, Borshak's Lair, which you guys haven't done yet, Night of the Walking Wet, which you just finished, and a few others that show up in this book. They're pretty cool. They're super imaginative. A lot of them, they're brutally lethal, some of them. Some of them aren't. Some of them are a little more role play and all that, but there's a few of them in here that are just straight up like save or die, or maybe you don't even get a save, kind of kill you dungeons. But this was the environment that something like Tomb of Horrors got published into. That was kind of the play culture of the time.
Well, I hate to make you monologue even more, but you want to just kind of give us an intro to just give us an overview of the module?
Okay. All right. So the whole module takes place in this one valley called County Crake. All right. And as written, it's a pretty horrible place to wander into. You've got one big kind of lake sort of area, and then a castle on an island within that. And that's where the sort of mega dungeon of all this happens, Castle Crake. Just south of there, along a little river, you've got Crakesborough. And according to the module as written, Crakesborough was long ago completely overrun by ghouls from the surrounding swampland. And these are a very special kind of ghoul. That's these walking wet creatures that are somewhere between zombies and slimes or oozes. The purpose of this whole county actually was to tie together all of these different adventures that Judges Guild have been publishing as just standalone things. That's why the first thing that you guys did when you got to County Crake was Fichelrak's Tomb. There's spots on this map for the other adventures, but they didn't really fit into our campaign. So a few of those I'll put elsewhere. A few of them I just may never run a TBD on that. But anyway, the whole thing is pretty much a clone, an elaboration, in homage to maybe the Blackmore Supplement 2 adventure, Temple of the Frog. It's pretty much the same kind of setup. You've got this weird cult led by this guy named Cephalic the Unwell. He's got a small army of hobgoblins working for him who are religious fanatics for the slime god. He also has all of these priests working for him, and they're all controlling this sort of army of aqua zombies, as they call them. And there's various other sorts of demons and monsters that are in their control or happen to inhabit the dungeons below Castle Crake and so on. So yeah, the backstory of this place is that long ago there was some warrior heroes that got honored by getting this valley and building it up as a barony, and it got attacked by some ogres, and everybody got killed. And then not long after that, the ogres eventually just kind of like wandered off or something, I think. I can't remember exactly what happened to the ogres, but this is hundreds of years of history. Like, there's 700 years of history that are just kind of info dumped at the beginning of this whole thing. And by God, they name every single fucking baron that for each generation throughout this whole dynasty. But 150 years ago, I think, a object crashes out of the sky and smashes into the land. There is a weird slime creature inside of it that's sort of like a colony of like little ooze worm things. This random dude, Cephalic the Unwell, manages to scoop it up and form a little cult around it, and is basically feeding it. And it's not clear whether this thing is controlling cephalic, or if cephalic's controlling this thing. It's kind of left up to you in some ways as you run it. But yeah, it's real weird. There is no home base here. Unlike what later becomes the convention and Keep on the Borderlands, Hamlet, so on. There is no town to go back to, so I basically just had to take Crakesborough, remove the fucking Nalfeshni, the high-level demon that is just kind of floating around that area in the rules as written, or in the adventure as written, and all of the ghouls that inhabit the city or the town, and instead, kind of roll it back and see what was this town like before it got overrun. And so I had to come up with some NPCs to give you guys some kind of base of operations, because goddamn, I have no idea how you could possibly do any of this stuff just rolling in, solo.
Yeah, I've been looking at over the adventure, and you're just wandering into a big, very dangerous area, and there's no real safe place for the player characters that I can see anywhere. There's no place to get a good night's rest away from danger. It's like I don't see how this is anything other than lethal for a party of even very high level characters as written.
The closest thing to a safe spot is Hormoth's lair, if you manage to get on his good side by reading him poetry. And that would be presumably pretty safe, because you've got a huge old green dragon that, for whatever reason, is a buddy. But everything else is just a death pit.
It does kind of imply how at this stage, games, D&D was probably more of like a board game night, or seen as such, because I could definitely see like, people having these characters they've made, they love these characters or whatever, and then the DMs just running them through dungeon. Well, this week we're going to go through the Walking Wet or whatever, and then, if you die, whatever, you either make new characters, or, maybe next week you just keep the characters and you just run through a different one or whatever. Because like you were saying, this doesn't really reek of a game like we play today. It still feels different, almost like it's a challenge. It's let's see if you can live through this, and the DM delights in you not. You know what I mean? Kind of like the fist pump every time somebody dies version of DMing, There
is definitely a lot more of that, like, challenge kind of mentality to it. And no, I don't think that people were as in love with their characters at this point as we get today. However, some of the articles in this Dungeoneer compendium make me think that there was a lot more like role play, thoughts about characters and things than what I had first thought. Like, there's this article on idiosyncrasies in Dungeons and Dragons, and it's just a bunch of different charts that you can roll up about, like, weird stuff about your character. Some of them are like, silly things like, you hiccup a lot, or you're a slob, or a practical joker, or whatever. Other ones are like, a little more interesting. They're, you've got psychological problems, or you've got like personality disorder stuff, or even just like allergies and like, odd little quirks, phobias, things about your character that have absolutely no mechanical, component to them at all. So I don't know, a little bit of both, I think.
Another thing that strikes me at looking at this adventure, because there is no population here who isn't hostile to you, at least initially, like, you kind of have to roll in with your crew, and if a player character dies, you're basically promoting from within. You're not going to be recruiting from anywhere, adventure as written, if you have characters who end up getting killed.
Yeah, that's true. The only thing that they have here that really connects this to anywhere else is north of the map, north of the castle, labeled B, is a road that is just said to go to the capital of whatever realm you're in, and it straight up just says, like, it's your adventure, make it up. But that's the only way in and out of here, except for, maybe this river that isn't really said to connect to anything. at all. Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of the end of the line. I could easily see many parties wandering into this to a TPK.
So did you, in the early days of this module, we went into a different dungeon that was almost like self-contained, unrelated. Did you drop that in as a DMing decision? I'm not seeing it in here.
No, that was Fichelrak's Tomb, and that's part of this whole compilation that Dungeoneer did. I believe it is P on the map is the key code for Fichelrak's Tomb, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay, yeah, there it is.
Yeah. No, those were supposed to be there. I took out a few, like I said, but yeah, Fichelrak's Tomb was absolutely right there where I put it, where they put it.
We should definitely mention how long it took. Like how many sessions, if you have that information, how many sessions, how much actual real time did it take us to get from start to finish?
God, Clayton, can you help me on that? You got the log, right?
Yes, we entered in session 25 on April the 11th, and last session we came to what we consider to be the end of the adventure. We are all leaving, and that was on November 7th, and the session number was 54. So like 28 sessions we spent in the county, and that includes Fichelrak's Tomb, which we did an episode on, like episode 147 or something like that.
Yeah, I think you got through Fichelrak's Tomb in maybe 5 or 6 sessions, if memory serves.
But yeah, we were in this for like 7 months.
By far the longest adventure I've ever run.
7 months of weekly play, 3 to 4 hours a session. There were some sessions where we basically spent the entire session back in town talking, but really not that often, I don't feel like. But I do feel like we kind of dithered more than an old school party would have in making decisions about what we were going to be doing next. But still, I mean, this is a pretty huge adventure, especially one that is written on 13 pages of a zine.
Yeah, and that's worth mentioning. A lot of the time spent was us kind of figuring out the dungeon crawl procedure of the olden days, and figuring out how to adjudicate this and that and whatever. So I think a group of players from back then that just kind of knew what to do and what to expect, they certainly could have got through it faster than what we did. But thank you guys for hanging in there with me. God damn, I was expecting people to start dropping here before long.
I mean, I will say, to our credit, I think that the thing about OD&D that we've all learned is that it's just different. And I don't know, it's difficult for me to see, Jordan, because I'm not proficient with it myself. You're the DM, you're the master of it all. I don't know what you've inserted or not. So maybe some of these things aren't a part of the original play, but the way we do it, let me see if I can summarize this, Jordan. You correct me if I'm wrong. So the way that we're playing in the game is that Jordan keeps everybody in turns if we're in like a lethal setting. So if we're exploring a dungeon or in combat itself, we still act as if we're in turns, and we have a caller who's the head of our party, whose job it is to communicate to the dungeon master what we're doing. So Jordan will start, say we're not engaged in a combat, but we're exploring the dungeon. Jordan will then say, okay, it's turn 7, starting now, discuss what you're going to do, and caller, let me know when you're done. And we dither and we talk, but we've gotten to where we come to a consensus as quickly as possible, and that resolves that turn. And so when we're not in direct combat, Jordan, aren't the turns, are they like considered 5 minutes, 10 minutes real time?
So the old school standard was 10 minutes, and we started out that way. But as we kept playing, and people kept telling me the types of things that they wanted to do on a turn, it seemed to me like people's conception of a turn is a little closer to what you could reasonably get done in 5 minutes instead of 10. And so I just made the call to switch to that and adjusted things accordingly to make sure that things still worked for normal durations and stuff. But yeah.
Okay, so that's how the the moment by moment would go in the sessions. And we just got to where, I mean, OD&D is very difficult and can be very dangerous. So we just developed a very cautious, careful play style where it's almost like square by square, 10 foot by 10 foot movements in a turn. We finally eventually got into a groove where we felt like we could go longer distances. But when we had been to a place we hadn't been before, I mean, it would be send the thief or send the person with dark vision creepily scouting ahead, very slow, and then moving until we find something interesting and bringing everybody up behind us. Using the whole 10-foot poles at times to check check for traps, and then we would encounter a door, check for traps, check, do locks or whatever. And, just playing that way, I feel like we were very successful because, we didn't lose anybody that I know of. And it seems like that's kind of rare. I mean, granted, you supported us a lot by adding a town where we definitely would get into a pinch, flee back to town, get a night's rest, then come back. Without that, that completely changes the lethality of it. But that being said, it's still, I mean, how many times my character, the thief, got dropped? Just like, boom, you're dropped, or you have some awful magical effect. Like, I would say at least 5 or 6 times.
Well, part of that is house ruling how to handle going to 0. If this was, hard mode original D&D, you go to 0 hit points and you're dead, and then you make a new character. I don't like that, so that's not what I did. I did something much closer to like what second edition does, and give you some basically negative hit points to kind of bleed through and give people a chance to get to you to heal you. But yeah, the only death that we had was due to friendly fire.
Lol, I don't even remember that.
Yeah, that was Pistachio. He got grabbed by the giant octopus under the bridge in the crypt, and Jackson tried to shoot the octopus's tentacle, which was grabbing Pistachio, missed, and so then I rolled, and he hit Pistachio, and Pistachio died.
Pour one out for Pistachio. I forgot about old Pistachio.
Yeah, that was our first rogue for this. And then of course you started this with a different character. You started this with Ari, the young elf girl magic user, and then swapped out to a rogue who just kind of swaggered his way into the valley unannounced.
Indeed, I did. I took a brief pause from thieving and then went back to thieving.
So I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what was it like going through this? From your first introduction to this area, you went through Fachelrack's tomb, you met the people in Crakesborough, blah blah blah. But then when things switched and you guys started dungeon delving into Castle Crake, what were your guys' sense of the place? How did you feel? Was it fun? Did you like this adventure?
I would say that I did enjoy it, but I feel like it was very appropriate that the location of this adventure is basically a swamp, because I do feel like the party kind of mired itself in this location. And there were a lot of disagreements within character, and I'm sure a lot of it was bleeding out of character, of whether or not we should just give up on this location, because in a lot of ways it was becoming a slog. We were going down in, we were getting maybe 2 or 3 rooms cleared, and we would be out of spells, we would be out of healing, we would be to the point where we would need to retreat and rest, and that is with your very generous use of using mana points, and not the original intention of having all of the casters memorize your particular spells for the day. Your spellcasting system is much more flexible than what was originally in first edition D&D, and I can't imagine how much more time and more trips down into the dungeon it would have taken if we had been playing by those old school rules.
Yeah, I mean, the word that first came to mind was frustrating. But now that we're just looking at it post-mortem, I feel like it was kind of like a honing stone for the party. I mean, not that we hadn't been playing OD&D for a while, we had, but I was one of those players more than midway through. We had been in a long time, but it was maybe 10 sessions ago. I had a conversation with another player who had a similar alignment and was similarly frustrated by our party's slow attack. I mean, at no point, honestly, did I ever feel like we were being forced into anything we didn't want to do or anything like that. But I definitely felt like we had this pot commitment, like in poker, that was about 10 sessions ago. I was just like, F this place. It's not even worth it. Let's get out of here. But, as we went on, when you can tell that your fellow players they want to go to the end, you're almost stuck like a parent at a birthday party for your kid. You're just kind of there. You're trying to help make sure they have a good time, and all the while you're just slogging through just like it's over yet. That's not how it ended up for me. I actually, looking back on it, I enjoyed it because it forced us to stop playing 5th edition and start playing a different game. And now I really enjoyed it, and I'm kind of anxious to see where it goes because I feel like we've kind of hit our stride with how to play this game.
And I also want to say that part of the learning curve was the attrition of resources that we were experiencing. And that's not something that we really we have experienced in other editions of D&D, where not only are we tracking, whenever we're in the dungeon, tracking food and water, but we're tracking light. We're tracking torches that we're burning through. We're tracking the oil that we're burning through. And when we get into a bad situation and we're like the spellcasters are out of spells, like I was at a point where I had to make a decision of like, I had an enemy right in front of me, and the only thing I had in my hands that was an attack was my lantern that I was carrying, and whether or not to use that as a weapon to attack the character who was attacking me. And that's something I've never experienced before, where I had to basically use this item, my lantern, as a weapon, broke it, and basically caught the enemy on fire. But then I was without a lantern until we were able to get back to town, and I was able to find somebody who still had one, and I'm pretty sure it was one of the last ones that were in town.
Yeah, that was so fucking awesome. But yeah, the game plays completely differently when you don't have like infinite firebolt cantrip or whatever the fuck at your disposal. You're definitely not the Avengers rolling in with your quasi magical superpowers and just mowing down whatever gets in your way. Like totally different kind of vibes. I'm glad that you guys are hitting your stride here. I agree. You guys are doing really well.
Can I say one more thing real quick, a little off the topic of this particular thread, but I noticed going through this module, and like you said, it's kind of like a nod to the frog, what was it called? Frog King?
Temple of the Frog.
Yeah, Temple of the Frog. But it struck me that the first two real big dungeons that we encountered, the two earlier days, early edition modules, they were horror as fuck. And looking at the current one now, the current edition now, you can tell how the player base has shifted in taste. You can tell this was made in a time where Tolkien was not king. I mean, he was king of the fantasy genre, right? But he wasn't necessarily the primary influence on these people. He wasn't, the genre of fantasy hadn't solidified as that's what D&D is. D&D is a fantasy game simulator. It still is, but it's got so many horror elements too. That's like it's front and center. I think that you're supposed to be terrified in a way in these games that I don't think 5th edition currently is.
Not only the horror, but the sci-fi also, because there's also the crater where a spaceship has literally crashed into this world.
Yeah, the slime god's in a spaceship too, right?
Yeah, that's where it comes from. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the days of sword and sorcery and weird fiction. And to my understanding of it, like it's in the mid 70s or so when people start picking up Lord of the Rings and really getting into it. Like, you know, Led Zeppelin's coming out like just a couple years prior to this with, you know, lyrics about Mordor and stuff. It was just kind of hitting the scene, but, you know, for decades and decades prior to this, there was nerds that were eating up, you know, Conan books and all this other crazy shit that, like Michael Moorcock was writing back then. And, you know, it's nothing in those things to come across, you know, weird aliens, and it's much more Lovecraft inspired, and, you know, definitely not afraid to, you know, mix up genres and stuff. Like there was not a clear dividing line between, fantasy and science fiction as much back then as there is today, for sure.
Can I ask you a question, Jordan? I want to kind of just want to turn your question around on itself. Watching us go through this, do you have any highlight memories, be it frustrating memories or laughing memories, just at us trying to get through this thing? What's your appraisal of us and some of the goofier shit that we did? You know, like how many times were you just banging your fist against the table, like, oh, just fucking go to 2 doors down, you idiots?
Yeah. A lot of this was me kind of like hand wringing, like wondering if I had like got you guys too gassed up about the lethality of these early adventures, because you all were definitely approaching this like a minefield, and I completely understand why, and I believe that I instructed you that you probably should approach it like that, and I sort of regretted it a little bit as I saw just how far you all were taking that to begin with, and it forced me to refine a lot of the like rules procedure stuff on my side as we went. So as much as it was you guys figuring out your, you know, in-party protocols and that kind of thing, it was me kind of like, you know, knocking the rough edges off of some of the rules that I'm using and figuring out how to like get through the stuff much faster, because, you know, it's one thing to sit there with your 10-foot pole and you want to check every tile or whatever, but when you're actually doing that as players that have set aside 4 hours of your evening one night a week, like how much real world time do you really want to do doing that bullshit, and how often? So it had me kind of rethinking a lot of that stuff. But you guys really cohered as a group in this dungeon a lot better than I think you did when we did Temple of the Frog. You guys still stuck together, but I could tell that players were kind of getting their stride, and your characters are more powerful now, so you guys are kind of you know, figuring out what you're good at. Probably the highlight of cooperation for me is when you guys formed up perfectly in the stairwell with the high ground, when you had just stumbled upon a room full of hobgoblins that just happened to be in formation in that room, and kind of like a muster call thing. There's some percentage chance given in the book that when you wander into that room, they'll be there. I rolled it. They were there. And you guys handled that so pro, it blew my mind. Like I'm sitting here rolling the dice, just doing the stuff, you know, hobgoblins have so many hit points. Here's their AC, whatever. You guys turned that into a fucking meat grinder. It was amazing. It was one of the best examples of like unit tactics and teamwork that I've ever personally run in a role-playing game.
I don't feel like it happens very often that the use of choke points really falls in directly into the player character's favor, and that was one of those instances. And even though it was basically our perfect situation, it was still incredibly tense for us in that moment, because that's the fight where my character, the magic user, was down to, well, do I toss my lantern?
Yeah, and I think let me see here. I'm going through some notes and stuff to kind of jog my memory, because there was just so much shit going on here. Another scene that I'm always going to probably hang on to for this is when you guys did kind of stumble into the slime god early, and you were evacuating people out of the area as this thing was kind of like, Cthulhu monstering out. That was a really cool situation, because it was trying to like pull Jackson into it, who had like stayed behind. He's kind of become more or less the party leader as far as I can tell. But he was,
for sure,
he was going to stay behind and, go down with the ship if need be. And it was him and it was you, Clayton, that were the last ones standing after you'd hauled out all these other people trying to, you just rescued a bunch of people from Crakesborough, and this thing is like going all, tentacly on you guys. That was fucking cool. That was a tense situation, and I'm really pleased with how it worked out. Yeah. What was some of the highlights for you guys?
Well, that was definitely one of my highlights. I can't speak for Chris, but I'm pretty sure that in that moment, both he and I definitely felt like big damn heroes, because we got the people out, and literally by the skin of our teeth, we got ourselves out as well.
For me, I had a really rough time with this particular module. My interest in it was low from the jump, mainly because I did decide to make that change and I dropped a new character in. So it took a while for me to get the feel of the character anyway. But I think by the end of it, I'm really looking back on it, I think that I figured out how a rogue is supposed to operate in the dungeon, how he could be useful. Because, not to toot my own horn or anything like that, but there were whole swaths of the dungeon. And yes, we were being overly cautious, for sure. But I definitely felt like indispensable, because, when you're the only one that can really pick a lock or check for traps with any good, whatever, in a dungeon, you got a lot to do. And so there were times where I was just like, shit, man, if it wasn't for me, these guys would be screwed. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. In old school D&D, the thief is as important as the cleric. I will say, it's at least as important as the cleric. When the thief first came out, the thief was not one of the original classes. The original classes were just fighter, magic user, and cleric, and that's all you had. The thief came out in the Greyhawk supplement, the first supplement to OD&D, and a lot of people thought it was broken. They're like, this guy can just kind of do everything. Yeah, they're critical.
Yeah, I will say, everybody has is indispensable, I think, in this game. I can't think of a single character. We do have two clerics, so sometimes the redundancy is obviously awesome, but I wonder for their sake, if they don't feel a little bit overlapped. But I know there's never any shortage of need for healing usually, and I just really I can't think of having gone through this dungeon without every single party member. Every single party member saved everybody's bacon at least once, if not once a session.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So once we actually got into, do we want to talk about the county itself and kind of what we encountered there, including the dragon, or do we want to focus on just the dungeon itself? Because the county itself, the greater county, has a lot of stuff going on in it, even though it's not the focus of the adventure.
Well, I think you're going to find a lot of the stuff that was going on in the county itself was stuff that I had to create in order to give you guys some some humans to interact with. You're not going to find any of the NPCs that you met in Craigsborough inside the pages of this adventure. You're not going to find Vilda. You're not going to find Magnus. You're not going to find Hans or any of those people. That was all stuff that I had to come up with to give you all people to talk to.
I learned a lot. Sorry, the squirrel. This is my ADD kicking in. But one thing, looking back on it, is I learned a lot as a DM by watching this and realized that in the future, I am not going to coddle parties at all. I was just thinking, like, when we're out of the castle and going into the swamp, I never really felt like the swamp zombies. It's so weird that it's titled that, because I barely remembered there were even zombies out in the swamp. You know what I mean? We didn't really go there too much because we realized, oh crap, there are zombies in a swamp, which seems bad. Let's not go there. And we did a couple of times, but we didn't stay for long. We didn't dip in with them much because, unlike in 5th edition where 6 months into a game, you're probably 8th, 9th level. By that time, zombies, hobgoblins, they're puds. You've been powered through levels. No big deal. You're the Avengers, right? Well, in this way this game plays, like, anything's deadly. No matter, even if you're third, I'm 3rd level now, which is actually pretty high, I feel. I don't know, is there a 5th level character now?
Yeah, Jackson's 5th.
So, I still feel like he's not eager to go into fights like he would be as a 5th level fighter. I mean, if a 5th level fighter or ranger or whatever encountered like a group of 5 or 6 zombies in a swamp, we're probably just going to piece through those guys because we can. I don't think that will ever happen in this game.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Especially in an environment where if we're traveling across the swamp and our character slips and falls, it's very likely that a zombie is going to grab hold of us and hold us down and drown us. That is a fear that I had as a player and as a character every time we had to traverse the swamp. Is the next step going to be quicksand or a sinkhole that is going to pull me down? And we had several instances where exactly that happened to characters, and it was a frantic scramble to grab them and pull them out of the water just as quickly as possible.
That was so awesome. I was really hoping I could keep you guys afraid, like, the whole time playing this game. And the more it dragged on, the more it became like, are they just going to get so bored of being in this place that, like, there is no more, like, lingering fear? Or even worse, are they going to get, like, so fed up with it they just throw themselves into danger just out of sheer boredom's sake? I'm glad it didn't go that way.
I will be honest, if you hadn't allowed the dragon to help us traverse the swamp, it would have gotten to that point for me. I would have said, fuck this. It's not worth the journey from town to the castle in the morning and in the evening in order to get to the dungeon site to go into that much danger every single time. The journey itself shouldn't be as dangerous as the destination for it to be worth it.
If you guys had to put a level suggestion, like a suggested level range on this dungeon, what would you guess just off the top of your head? There isn't one. This is way before anybody ever even thought of that idea, but what would you guess?
8 and up at least, probably. Maybe not. Maybe 5th to 12th, maybe.
I agree with 5th at the lower end. Like, I feel like if our characters as they exist now had just rolled into County Crake, into the oh crap, no, what's the name of it? Night of the Wet Walkers.
Walking Wet.
Night of the Walking Wet, yeah. If our characters just now had walked into here, I think we might have a different mentality about it. I feel like it might feel like a more appropriate adventure and level up maybe a couple of levels during the course of it. Maybe 5 to 7 would be what I would recommend for a party. And that would be a full party of level 5 to 7, not, well, some characters are level 1 and the highest level character has just reached level 5 as we are leaving.
That's another brutally unfun bit about old school rules is depending on who's running it. There's definitely the interpretation, the explicit like suggestion that if you gain enough experience to level up while you're in the dungeon, you have to go find somebody to train with in order to get your next level, which there's no one anywhere around here for that to happen for the player characters. But once you get to whatever that experience total is to have attained the next level, you no longer get any further experience until you level up. So yeah, you just be kind of stuck here or leave it as it is and go away, level up, come back. But God, trying to keep track of everything that would have happened as a result of your guys' most recent dungeon incursion was one of the hardest things for me running this. Like every single week, I spent the entire week being like, okay, they did this, and that. They killed these things. They were over here, and then they left. So what does the fucking like 5 different factions of interested parties do to react to, what am I going to have waiting for them next week? It was madness.
So what were the different factions? Because we kind of I know we encountered most of them. I don't know if I could identify what exactly they were. There was an undead faction. There was the hobgoblin faction. There was maybe the priest, the head of the hobgoblins was maybe a representative of a faction.
Count the townsfolk.
Well, I'm not really counting them because they were a creation for our playthrough of this. Once you get down in there, there was the demon circle, there was a demon circle, and then there was another creature. I want to say it was like a salamander, maybe, in another section.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something we should mention. There's just no way we're going to be able to spoil this for anybody because this is 6 months of our lives we're trying to sum up. But it's worth mentioning, I think, that added to our caution was fairly early on, maybe 10 sessions into the game when we were finally kind of balls deep in the dungeon. Somebody did a random, like a check evil or a whatever, detect evil spell. And Jordan, I don't know if you did this on purpose or what, but like you just drew gigantic swaths, circles of like demon hellfire or whatever on a part of the map we could not see, so they could just feel it. And as a player, I know that really ratcheted up my caution level because I'm like, oh my God, like that has to be a major demon that like we just decided like that had to be something super crazy evil that's probably super lethal. And from that point on, every time we would inch closer to that part of the map where that drawing was, I would get so nervous and scared that I was like, that was a huge contributing factor to my caution in the game.
That's fucking awesome. I'm so happy that worked that way.
One thing that we were able to experience that if we were just running this sitting at a table that it probably wouldn't have come across as well was the artwork itself for the adventure. Like you dropping the actual artwork of some of these fucking monsters, like literal monsters, like unlike anything that has been in D&D probably since. I mean, the oh crap, what the hand thing?
The Harvestman.
The Harvestman, yeah. I have never seen a representation of the Harvestman in any subsequent editions of D&D.
Yeah, they're a completely unique original creation from the Dungeoneer. That they are fully statted out in that issue. I believe this is issue 2, if I'm not mistaken, that this came out. And yeah, the Harvestmen are horrible. To try to describe it to listeners, you've got imagine a human hand that is large enough that it could completely tackle you if it wanted to. And in the middle of this hand, these huge fingers, you've got this face that is vaguely a human face, but there's no nose really. There's this horrible toothy maw and these completely jet black eyes, and the face is just all contorted into this like horrible snarl. And these things are they have kind of a backstory. Like they're this weird hybrid of humans and these like spider demon things, and then they've just kind of been breeding for however long and populating this area. And then in the story of this adventure, this guy gets these magical pipes and basically does like a Pied Piper kind of thing, and I guess leads them all into the caverns beneath Castle Crake. And there's this giant version that is the Harvest Mother that kind of runs the nest, and then there's just shitloads of these things down there, and they're like trapdoor spiders. It's fucking terrifying. There's another one that another unique monster that I did not get to introduce you guys to because you didn't go to that part of the dungeon. All the way in the southeast is these things called terrahawk bats, which are basically like sort of human-sized bat things with these kind of like scorpion tails that would just kind of like curl up and then like leap at you. They don't have arms or legs. They're just wings and these scorpion tails, and they can like paralyze you and then just kind of like swarm you and like, sort of piranha you to bits. There's a whole huge cavern of those terrahawk bat things, in addition to all the other terrible things down here. To get back to the original question though about the factions, let me see here. You've got kind of the main faction, which is Cephalic, and the captain of the Hobgoblin Guard, and all the hobgoblins underneath him, and a few other cultists that are kind of the core power structure of this dungeon. But then within that, you've got a few kind of like secret factions. There's this one guy, Simon, who is kind of the drama of what's going on in there turns on the fact that Cephalic has been cursed by the gods for all his evil doings or whatever, and he can't die, but he's completely like bedridden and just kind of a complete invalid. So the cult is sort of like collapsing underneath him, and from the little bit of insight you get on Cephalic, you get this kind of hint of ennui, and like this dude just wants to die. He's like 150 years old or something, and it just keeps dragging on and dragging on. You've got a few cultists that are loyal to him and want to find a cure. You've got a few cultists that think, well, his time's up and time for somebody else to take the reins. The slime god itself is pretty much just a stupid beast as far as anybody can tell. It's just a horrible monster. So it doesn't have any skin in the game, really. Then there's a magic user that is just kind of interested in studying the slime god. And then probably the most potentially interesting character there is Jahala, which is it's Cephalic's concubine, I guess I'll say. Yeah, and she's interesting because she's a class that doesn't appear in D&D. It's a creation from a supplement, or maybe it was even one of the early magazines. It might have been Strategic Review, now that I think about it. This kind of caster called a Circean that is all about like mind control and stuff, and weird like poisons of mind control. So those are like the human factions, living human factions. Then you've also got the barons of the Crake dynasty, who are just floating around as ghosts, and they've got all kinds of little dramas, and they ask for favors. Some of them try to like take you over and stuff. So there's that whole bit. And then there's just a few like really weird monsters around there's a will-o-wisp that's just kind of like curious and it's not going to attack you. But there's other like weird cursed monsters and creatures and stuff that are wandering around. Am I forgetting anything? There's the salamander that's just kind of stuck there. It was summoned to like, guard the place. He was intelligent enough that you could have possibly interacted with him, though he's like very aggressive and evil. There's and Hormoth, the green dragon, like we discussed before. I think that's pretty much all of them. Yeah, I don't think I'm leaving anybody out.
I will say a dungeon like this weird things came to my head, just like that. If Cephalic's 150 years old, and I don't know how long he's had this cult, but I'm thinking like, were there multiple generations of like where did they come from? How did they sustain themselves? Like, if it's basically an empty cavern, where does what does the salamander eat? He would have to eat the hobgoblins. So, like, I don't understand how any of this maintained itself. There was definitely no... People didn't think that deep back then. It's like, are there female hobgoblins? Where's the nursery? How do they replenish? Do they go kidnap people? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, the whole dungeon ecology thing was definitely not well explained. The kind of headcanon I had about the whole thing is that the hobgoblins probably have some villages up in the mountains, and this is where they go, to kind of work or whatever. It definitely sounds like this has been going on a long time, and it says specifically that the hobgoblins have been there with Cephalic from the beginning, but I don't think it ever says anywhere in the original monster book how long hobgoblins live, so maybe they just think about these things as being sort of immortal monsters. I definitely think that the salamander would fall into that category, because you have to summon those from like the plane of elemental fire or something. Those are not like natural creatures at all. But yeah, like, why are there so many aqua zombies? You had to have humans to begin with. So, okay, where's all the humans coming from? So it's stuff like that why I had to, contrive a living village for this whole cult apparatus to be feeding off of generationally as a huge parasitic structure, right? It falls apart without some kind of input.
So whenever Chris had the idea of, let's try to convince the undead to assist us in clearing out the dungeon, it's from your reaction to that, it sounded like it was something that was actually in the module as something that was at least a feasible option to the players. Is that something that you did on the spot, or was that something you thought about ahead of time, or is it in fact in the module?
A little bit of both. So the structure of this module is as chaotic as the adventure is itself. You've got, just these paragraphs, like individual paragraph of a whole section of the place, and maybe it's just a couple sentences. Within that, you've got just a few scattered offhanded remarks about, where things happen to be. There's not really a whole lot in kind of the info dump that really explains how the designers think this is going to go, or like what kinds of role-playing opportunities are just sort of waiting there, and, what narrative controls the group might have. All of that is years and years and years down the line from now. This is super early stuff. So I had to go through and just kind of like piece a lot of this together after multiple rereads, and like, figuring out this like kind of spider's web thing of how these different entities interact with each other. So it doesn't present the Barons of Crake as a faction. It goes into a little bit of detail about most of the barons that are still kind of floating around doing stuff. It's also worth mentioning that it's not exactly clear what the barons are supposed to be, as far as like D&D stats. The ghost is like that. We could probably do a whole podcast on ghosts and ghost-like things as that monster has changed over the editions, but it's very up in the air what they mean by these like spirit terms. So I just kind of had to take them as a block rather than spend God knows how much more of our real lives going through every single one of these individual little dramas and weirdnesses. Like some of these barons are just straight up evil. Some of them will like try to fuck you up if you don't do exactly what they say, and other ones are like helpful and stuff. So I just kind of, pulled a Return of the King and just batched them for brevity's sake. So I was just done with this module by the time that idea came around.
So I kind of feel like we're starting to wind down. I think we've gone over most of the points that we that have come to mind in reviewing our experience through this module. Is there any other points that anybody wants to bring up or talk about?
Yeah, I want to talk about how fucking weird this module gets right at the end. It looks like, this is, that whole Jaquazian design of like loops kind of turning in on themselves, and you finding secret passages to get back to the place you started and all that cool stuff. And I love that kind of thing, but the way that I read it, it seems like they kind of assume that you're going to wind up somewhere around Cephalic's room and up in his apartments in the northeast part of this, and then go through the portal and wind up in the slime god's like inner sanctum, right? If you search around in Cephalic's room, though, you find some weird shit. For whatever reason, in the kitchen, there is a +1 can opener. There is a whole wall of, at the time, modern American canned foods. In Cephalic's room, he's got a strong box with American money in it. There is a portal in the kitchen that if you go through it, you wind up in 1970s Los Angeles. So you could have like a fucking, what is it, like Beastmaster 2 kind of scenario where suddenly your group just leaves this castle and climbs through this portal, and they're just hanging out in 1977 LA. What the fuck is the DM supposed to do then? I don't have a clue. I'm so glad you guys didn't. But I think probably the most hilarious thing in this whole dungeon, and it probably says the most about who the creators were and where they were at in their lives. If you look under Cephalic's mattress, you find 3 very specific issues of Playboy magazine.
Lol. As silly as it sounds, maybe my sum up point running off of that is just, it's affected me a lot as a DM. I've thought a lot from the DM's perspective about how these things run. I've been paying a lot of attention, I guess you could say, to the flow of the game. And you just don't get enough weird crap in games anymore. Just weird off-the-wall stuff. Like, I think that's really cool. That kind of stuff, it's really cool. And it implies this depth that you'll never understand, right? Just this dude just had a portal to our world, and he would just, and of course the thing he would do is steal cans of food and money he can't spend. Or maybe he's from our world and prefers to be here, maybe? Who knows? It doesn't I'm sure it doesn't tell you why. And that's awesome. And I want to do more of that as a DM in the future.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff that's just left completely open-ended in this. And yeah, fuck explanations, fuck, box text, breaking it all down. This is just almost stream of consciousness is what this whole thing was. I feel like I've finally woken up out of a fever dream, personally. I'm really looking forward to getting back to some other stuff. I feel like we've given this as good a shake as we could possibly be asked to.
So what's your overall evaluation of this Jordan. Yeah, from the DM's perspective, having read it, taking into consideration how old it is, as an early days attempt at figuring out what this game of D&D can do. What do you think? How'd they do?
I think it was a noble effort to create something that really just never existed before this. I believe this is the biggest dungeon that was ever published at this point. Maybe by square footage, Temple of the Frog might rival it, but as far as just the variety of things going on and all that, this is just explosively imaginative. I'm giving it a lot of slack because this was so early and nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. So it's very impressive along those lines. From a practical perspective of, 2022 as a dungeon master, if I was not doing this archaeological experiment through early D&D, I don't think I could recommend this to people in the state that it's in. I think that it would be pretty amazing if, Judges Guild doesn't really exist anymore. The inheritor of that kind of fucked all that up. But if Janelle Jaquays, who's still around, happens to have the rights of this or something and does a complete rewrite of this and lays it out in a way that makes sense and makes it possible to run, I think it could be really quirky and cool and memorable. Unfortunately, the only thing like that I've seen is a few years ago at some convention. They had a very limited release of paperback only, where I think they just straight up reprinted this PDF as is with no alterations, if I'm not mistaken on that. There was some new cover art from Jaquays, but that was all. This is, I was mentioning before the podcast, this is a really weird bit of history here. You can't find this on the Judges Guild. You can't find this or much of anything these days on the Judges Guild's website, and the Drive-Thru RPG doesn't have this. The only way that I know of to get this is internet piracy, and if it were not for that, this very likely would just kind of slip through the cracks and fade into history. And I think from a historical perspective, this is a very important dungeon and a milestone for the hobby, but I would not recommend it to somebody who's used to playing 5th edition only and wants to try the old stuff. This requires a lot of work to make something of it. But yeah.
Hats off to the ODD community too, by the way. Just, there are people. I'm glad that you took this up, Jordan. I'm really enjoying. It gets me more connected to my hobby, and it's been fun for sure. I'm looking forward to seeing where this campaign goes for sure.
And specifically about this module or this adventure, I would say that if somebody could and were to give this a Curse of Strahd treatment of what happened with the original Ravenloft and updated to Curse of Strahd, if somebody could and would do that for this adventure, I'm pretty sure that this would be a pretty popular adventure if it were remade.
100%.
Yeah, I agree completely. So all that said, if we were to give this a rating, how would you guys rate this adventure as player experience? And then I'll probably come up with mine as a DM.
I would kind of echoing what you were kind of hinting at. I think this was an essential early stumbling step of the hobby. And it has to be graded on that curve. And on that curve, I think it would rate pretty high. I think on that curve, I would say this is probably a 7 or 8 adventure.
Yeah, I can't do it. I'm not going to refuse. All I'm going to say about it is I'm thankful that it was made, because like you all said, it clearly set a fire and created a standard or gave a playbook that my favorite pastime then developed into. So I'm just my rating is I'm very thankful for it. Being kind.
From a DMing perspective, from layout and all that stuff, I would give this probably a 1. I can't imagine a worse way to lay out this information. It's just the worst you could possibly do while still having the information somewhere on a page. From a perspective of creativity, though, and dungeon design, like the maps are pretty great considering this is all hand-drawn stuff. So just from that like creativity and potential for adventure perspective, yeah, I'd definitely give this probably a 7 or so out of 10. So yeah, that's Night of the Walking Wet.
Well, guys, are you ready to move on to geek things? Because although this entire episode could be considered a big geek thing.
Yep, let's do it.
All right, I'll start off with something that I just discovered earlier today, a YouTube series. Give me just a second to pull it up. So it is a YouTube series that literally just concluded a few days ago, based on the video game FTL, which came out about 10 years ago. This is a YouTube series that is animating a playthrough of the game, and adding a whole lot of story and background to it. A lot of story and background that's kind of implied in the game itself. This is a 40-episode web series that has been being made for the past 7 years and has recently just come to an end. There's many hours of content in this web series that I'm just beginning to go through. But if you love the game FTL, the YouTube series is called FTL Kestrel Adventures, and it's on YouTube under Andrew Kolonaga, I think maybe is how you pronounce his last name. I haven't heard it pronounced because I just found it, so I'm sure I'm butchering it. But yeah, there will be a link, and it's called FTL Kestrel Adventures.
Mine's going to be for my new keyboard. Just got it a few days ago. It's a Keychron, Keychron, and the model is a Q10. And I think they just came out not that long ago. It's got it's called an Alice layout. Imagine like if the keys were kind of like broken and curved in the middle, like downward towards you, so that the keys kind of curve with your hand. And it's, fully LED lit underneath. It's a mechanical keyboard, really nice switches. You can pop out the keycaps, change the switches, whatever. It's got a knob on it for, volume control and like 5 programmable keys. The whole thing is like programmable if you want to. But this thing is built like a fucking tank. Like if someone broke into my house and this was the only thing I had nearby, I truly believe I could beat a man to death with this keyboard. It is so heavy. It's like CNC aluminum, and it's just a fucking like block of aluminum. But it feels so good to type on. It sounds nice. It's sturdy. Like, I love this thing. I cannot say enough about the Keychron Q10. So if you're in the market for a new keyboard, you could do a lot worse than this one.
So mine's going to be a YouTube. It's not a channel. The channel is Alt-Shift-X. He is just another one of these guys who just goes deep dive contenting on different, Dune. He does Dune. He does like Lord of the Rings, all that stuff. My YouTube had been tossing at me this video by Alt-Shift-X called All Tomorrows, The Future of Humanity. And it just has the creepiest looking alien, thumbnail. So I finally clicked on it. And it's like an hour and a half, 40 minutes long is what it is, 40-minute long video. And apparently it is what he's doing is he's kind of deep diving, telling the history of this world building lore this guy named C.M. Kosman has been working on. And I guess he's a visual artist who likes to draw strange, weird, creepy as fuck drawings of different type of potential future humans and evolutionary humans. And so what he's done is he's created this fictional future for humanity that is 500 million years long. And it shows through his drawings. It's more about the artistry. He draws these drawings of weird potential future humans. But then in the storyline, it gets all crazy because like aliens invade and like dominate us and then genetically experiment on us and make us into these weird creatures. But there's just something so alluring. It drew me in. Just go watch it. It's called All Other Tomorrows. Literally the source material that his video links to is a Google Drive. Like, it's not even like a published book. It's like a Google Drive with a bunch of art that's beautiful. And the story is just crazy and awesome. So go check it out. It's the Alt-Shift-X video on All Tomorrow, the Future of Humanity. It's really creepy in a great way.
Sounds awesome. All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Yay.
Let's do it.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.